Most people think New York became rich because it was lucky. A good harbor, good timing, the right place at the right time. That story feels neat, it feels fair, and it is wrong. If geography alone made financial empires, there would be dozens of New Yorks around the world. If talent alone built Wall Street, then other cities full of smart people would have done the same. The real mystery is not why New York grew, but why it swallowed everything else. Why it outpaced older cities. Why it crushed rivals like Philadelphia, Boston, and even London's influence in the New World. And why, once it started winning, it became almost impossible to stop. To understand the rise of New York as a financial empire, you have to forget skylines and stock tickers. You have to start with mud, ships, debt, and fear. For now, you have to start when New York was not important at all. In the early colonial world, New York was not the center of power. Boston was larger. Philadelphia was richer. Charleston was more connected to global trade. New York was a small port with a mixed population, little political unity, and few grand plans. It changed hands from Dutch to British rule, and for a long time, it was more useful as a military post than as an economic engine. But this weakness became its strength. New York did not inherit a rigid elite. It did not have old merchant families that controlled everything. It did not have a single church, culture, or social class setting the rules. It was messy, it was open, and it was hungry. The port mattered, but not because it was beautiful. It mattered because it faced inward. The Hudson River cut deep into the land, far deeper than most rivers on the Atlantic coast. It reached toward the interior, toward farms, timber, grain, and later factories. But for decades, that advantage meant little. Goods still moved slowly. Roads were terrible. Rivers froze. Markets were local and fragile. What changed everything was not trade. It was finance. When the American Revolution ended, the new country faced a problem bigger than war. It had debt, massive debt. States owed money. Soldiers were unpaid. Foreign lenders were nervous. The national government was weak and broke. Many believed the experiment would collapse under its own weight. This is where New York enters the story in a way that most people miss. Alexander Hamilton did not see debt as a curse. He saw it as glue. He believed that if the national government took control of state debts and paid them reliably, it would create trust. That trust would create markets, and markets would create power. New York became the testing ground for this idea. Not because it was destined to be great, but because it already had something rare in the New World, a dense web of merchants, brokers, insurers, and ship owners who understood credit. These people were not idealists. They were practical. They wanted stable rules, enforceable contracts, and a place where money could move fast. When the federal government began issuing bonds, New York traders did not wait. They bought them. They traded them. They argued over them in coffee houses. They created informal exchanges where prices formed in real time. One small group of men even signed an agreement under a buttonwood tree to trade securities only with each other. It was not noble. It was not democratic. But it was efficient. This was the seed of Wall Street. At first, the system was fragile. Panics were common. Banks failed. Speculation ran wild. People lost fortunes overnight. But every crisis taught New York something valuable. It taught speed. It taught coordination. It taught how to survive chaos better than rivals. Philadelphia had prestige, but slower habits. Boston had discipline, but smaller ambition. New York had neither restraint nor patience. It learned by burning itself and then rebuilding stronger. As the country expanded west, finance mattered more than ever. Farms needed loans, canals needed funding, railroads needed massive capital. New York did not build all these things, but it financed them. And the one who finances controls the future. The Erie Canal is often told as an engineering story. It was also a financial revolution. By linking the Great Lakes to the Atlantic through New York, it slashed transport costs and redirected the flow of trade. Grain, timber, and later industrial goods poured toward New York's port. Insurance firms grew, banks multiplied, credit networks stretched across states. Every shipment created paper. Every paper created fees. Every fee strengthened the city's financial core. By the time other cities realized what was happening, New York had already built habits that were hard to copy. Deals happened face to face. Information traveled fast. Failure was punished quickly, but success was rewarded even faster. Then came the breaking point. The 19th century was not a smooth rise. It was violent, unstable, and often cruel. Financial panic struck again and again. The Panic of 1837 wiped out banks and destroyed lives. The Panic of 1857 spread across the Atlantic. Each time, critics said New York's system was broken. Each time, reform was promised. And each time, the core logic survived. Why? Because New York had learned something deeper than regulation. It had learned how to absorb shock. During the Civil War, this ability reached a new level. The federal government needed money on a scale never seen before. It needed weapons, uniforms, railroads, and soldiers. Taxes were not enough, so it borrowed. New York banks and brokers became the nerve center of war finance. They sold bonds to citizens. They worked with the government to stabilize markets. They handled gold flows and currency chaos. The war nearly broke the system, but when it ended, New York stood taller than ever. Washington held political power. New York held financial power. And financial power proved more flexible. After the war, America industrialized at brutal speed. Steel, oil, railroads, and factories transformed the economy. These industries needed huge pools of capital. Small local banks could not handle that scale. New York could. Investment houses emerged that could raise money from across the country and even overseas. They did not just fund companies, they shaped them. They decided which firms lived, merged, or died. This was the age when finance stopped being a service and became a force, and New York was its command center. But success created its own dangers. Wealth concentrated, trusts formed, competition faded, power pooled in fewer hands, crashes grew larger. The Panic of 1907 nearly collapsed the system. Banks stopped lending. People rushed to withdraw cash. Once again, critics said this was the end. And once again, New York adapted. Private bankers stepped in to coordinate rescues. The crisis exposed a flaw that could no longer be ignored. The country lacked a central stabilizer. This failure led directly to the creation of the Federal Reserve. The Fed was meant to limit New York's dominance. Instead, it anchored it, because even with a central bank, the deepest markets, the most talent, and the fastest information still lived in one city. The 20th century tested New York harder than ever. The stock market crash of 1929 shattered confidence. The Great Depression destroyed fortunes and faith. Banks failed by the thousands. Unemployment soared. This was the moment when New York could have lost everything. Instead, it transformed again. New rules emerged: securities laws, banking reforms, oversight institutions. Many believed this would weaken Wall Street. But regulation did not kill finance. It professionalized it. It raised barriers to entry. It favored large, complex institutions that could afford compliance. And those institutions were already based in New York. After the Second World War, the world needed a new financial anchor. Europe was damaged. Old empires were fading. The dollar became the global currency. New York became the place where that currency moved. Foreign banks opened offices. Global capital flowed through Manhattan. Deals crossed borders without leaving a single street. Even when industries moved away, finance stayed. The late 20th century brought new threats: computers, trading screens, globalization. Many predicted the end of geographic advantage. Money could move anywhere. Trades could happen from anywhere. Why would New York still matter? The answer was trust. Complex systems need dense networks of people who know each other, compete with each other, and watch each other closely. New York had spent 2 centuries building that density. Crashes continued. The crash of 1987, the crisis of 2008. Each time, failure was massive. Each time, the system bent but did not break. The fallout was always the same: anger, reform, promises to change everything, and then a quiet return to the core logic. Capital seeks depth, speed, and safety. New York offers all three better than anywhere else. Failed fixes tell their own story. Attempts to decentralize finance, attempts to move power elsewhere, attempts to shrink banks or simplify markets. Some worked at the margins. None changed the center of gravity. New York did not win because it was perfect. It won because it learned faster than rivals how to survive its own mistakes. So what does this story really tell us? First, financial empires are built on systems, not buildings. Ports, rivers, and skylines matter less than rules, trust, and habits that compound over time. Second, crises do not destroy financial centers by default. Often, they strengthen them by forcing adaptation and raising barriers to entry. Survival becomes a competitive advantage. Third, once financial power concentrates, it is incredibly hard to reverse. Money flows toward places that already have money, especially when uncertainty rises. The warning is simple but uncomfortable. A system that survives every failure may still be fragile in ways we do not see yet. Past survival does not guarantee future safety. It only proves past adaptability. New York's rise was not destiny. It was a chain of choices, accidents, and responses to fear. And the same forces that built it could someday build something else, somewhere else, under the right pressure. If you want to understand the future of global finance, do not just watch prices. Watch how systems respond to stress. That is where real power reveals itself. If this kind of deep cause and effect history helps you see the world more clearly, subscribe. Because the next empire is already forming, and most people will not notice it until it is too late.